Okay, with that, let's dig into some of the latest numbers here because, as I said earlier in this program, Mark Carney does arrive in Washington with his numbers softening here at home. And joining us right now is David Coletto, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, hello to you. I want to begin here by focusing in on Mark Carney because when we talk about the challenges the Prime Minister has here at home, it might be worthwhile to start with his approval numbers. We have that on a board here. This is from the study you released yesterday. The favourable line, the green line, is still higher than the red, but that seems to be changing direction. What are you finding here?
Yeah, I think we're seeing over time a slow but steady decline in the number of Canadians who say they have a positive view of the Prime Minister, while the negative line goes up. And so that plus 14, which is still, I should say, very good, relatively speaking, is much smaller than it was soon after the federal election, where there was maybe a sense of real unity and somewhat euphoria after that election has dissipated. So there has been a noticeable decline in how people feel about the Prime Minister. But I will say again, it's not as if his numbers have fallen off a cliff. They're just this steady progression in the negative direction.
Now, you also say that Canadians respect Mark Carney, but they're still unsure of him. What's leading you to that conclusion?
Well, I think two things. One is, Mark Carney is a relatively new, political leader. It was only in January that most people started to hear about him. When we showed a picture of him in a survey when he announced he was going to run for a Liberal leader, only 9% of Canadians recognized him. So he has very quickly become recognizable. But I think during the election, many Canadians were projecting a lot onto him. They saw him as competent, as experienced, as being the right person for this moment. And now they're starting to assess whether those very quick judgments were true. And I think over time, many Canadians remain, in fact, most of those who voted for him remain of the view that he is, but there's still many who don't really know him that well. And I think that's still something the Prime Minister has to think about as he navigates both public opinion and all the policy challenges that he has.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the concerns Canadians are expressing, because when you look at top concerns, or as you put it in your study, the top issues facing Canadians, you say affordability is by far the #1 concern right now, and Donald Trump, which arguably is the issue that allowed Mark Carney to win a mandate, is now down to issue #5. What kind of challenge does that set up for the Prime Minister?
Well, I think, he was elected in large part because those who voted Liberal said, I need somebody to be in this position who can deal with Donald Trump. And that's still, for many Canadians, as you said, one of the top 3 issues. Close to 3 out of 10, or 1 out of 3 say that. But we've seen that issue salience around Trump has declined over the last number of months. And in its place, 1, growing concern about the economy, particularly around employment, and 2, the reemergence of broader affordability concerns becoming the focus for the vast majority of Canadians. And so the challenge for the Prime Minister is that, when you ask people later in this survey, who do you think's best, the Conservatives or the Liberals or other parties, to deal with these issues? The Conservatives always do better on affordability. They're doing better on the economy among people who care about it, whereas the Liberals still dominate on who people think could best handle Trump. And so if the Trump issue continues to recede, that means the government and the Prime Minister are going to have to find a way to connect with people on those issues around affordability. I think one of the reasons they're repeating, both in the House of Commons and outside it, of the tax cut that was passed earlier this year, is a reflection that they understand that affordability question remains one of their Achilles heels. And I think this data backs that up.
Well, as you say that, there is another issue as well that's inching up the board in your study. This is Canadians more and more being concerned with the issue of crime. To be fair, the government says it will introduce bail reforms, most likely at the end of this month. But looking at your report, concerns over crime may potentially, help lift Conservative support? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and now 1 in 5 Canadians put crime and public safety as one of their top 3 issues. It's the highest it's been since we've been tracking that. Another survey we released last week showed that, close to almost 45% of Canadians think crime in their community is getting worse. And that's higher in the GTA. It's higher in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, around Vancouver. And so, yeah, I think one, a number of high profile events, as well as I think the Conservatives putting additional pressure on this, is raising the salience of that issue. And to your point, Michael, when you ask people which party do you think is best able to handle it, the Conservatives are well ahead. And so this crime and public safety is very much, as we talk about, a shield issue for the government. They're going to have to respond to it, because if it continues to rise in salience, it's another one of those issues that Pierre Poilievre can use to question the government and probably, chip away at its approval rating, as it's done, I think, over the last number of months on other issues.
Okay, but I hear that, but I think it's, let's also bring in the fact that, again, looking at your numbers, Pierre Poilievre's approval rating remains stubbornly stuck. What's happening there?
Well, I mean, he's stuck, right? It's basically 40% of Canadians have a positive view, and slightly higher number, 42%, have a negative. There's two ways of looking at it. One is maybe he's hit his ceiling. There's people who, again, I think because he's been around much longer than Mark Carney on the political scene, people have a much better sense of Pierre Poilievre. You either like him or you don't. And if you don't like somebody, it's hard to change their mind. But the second side is, he's still not that unpopular. He's just up against right now someone across the aisle who's still way more popular than he is. And so I think for him, it's more of like, can I hold the support I've got? Can I keep that base united? And in hopes that we can chip away at how people feel about the prime minister, because I think it's going to be hard for Mr. Poilievre to improve his overall impressions. You just can't let them get worse, I think.
Okay, so taking all of that, what do you think Mark Carney needs to get done with this Washington visit? Because, crime aside, what happens with the U.S. will affect all the other issues Canadians are prioritizing in your survey: affordability, housing, and the economy. What does Mark Carney need to do here?
I think it's one word. It's reassurance, right? He's got to signal to the public that he has things under control, that he is focused on trying to get the best deal possible, and that even if we can't, even if the status quo is not going to be, in Kuzma and down the road, that he has a plan to protect people, right? And that's why those who voted for Mark Carney, I think, sent him into this job, is that he was a reassuring figure. He did, demonstrated competence and calmness, and those are the things people want to hear from him. And that's what I would say is job one: is come out of Washington with some sense of clarity for people, because the world is so uncertain. It's that level of uncertainty is through the roof, and that's making people deeply anxious about a whole bunch of things. Mark Carney's job as a leader in this country is to calm people down a little and say, we're going to get through this, and here's the plan to do it.
Okay, David Coletto, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael. Take care.